Hello and welcome to the Love Vibe podcast, hosted by Angela and Key, two women from the African diaspora creating space to explore and celebrate the sometimes unheard voices, stories and storytellers that speak to triumph and healing in the face of adversity and trauma. We will look at our connections to ourselves, to others, the environment, ancestry and the stars. Yes, astrology. We acknowledge the traditional owners of the land, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and we pay respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. We welcome you to join us. Now, let's start the show. Hello, and welcome to the Love Vibe podcast about stories and about people. And today we have a very special guest. So we have Ana Ximena Torres Ramirez. Ana is a Colombian-Australian clinical psychologist that works in the area of eating disorders. She uses a weight-inclusive model of care, and she's committed to the dismantling of body oppression through the practice of embodied compassion and humanizing therapy. Ana is a member of the Australian Psychological Society, a member of the Australian and New Zealand Academy for Eating Disorders, a member of Health at Every Size Australia. Apart from that, one of her many superpowers is her warmth and skill in humanizing the therapeutic space, where she allows people to tap into their wisdom and build on their strengths. Ana, we celebrate you and we welcome you to the Love Vibe. Hi.
Thank you so much. When you read it all together, it sounds really, really amazing. I was like,
because
damn,
it is.
that?
That's you.
That's you.
Awesome.
And we're so welcome to have you.
Yeah, super excited.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here. This is I've been following you guys since the beginning and a little even before the beginning. So this is I'm glad to be here. I'm glad to be a part of this.
Oh,
so
awesome.
Today we're gonna ask all things about you and who you are and what your story is and what you bring to the table apart from your amazing, attributes and accolades and things that you do. So we're just going to kick it off now.
Let's.
And I'm really curious to know, Ana, where does your story begin?
I love this question because it can begin in so many different parts, right? But for me, I think the story always starts in Venezuela. So I was born in Venezuela of Colombian parents, was there for a little bit. And then, for the first, I think, 12 years of my life, I migrated to many countries, traveled. And that really was super formative, and it shaped my ability to be an insider and an outsider at the same time. And it, and here I am again now. I decided after doing my degree in psychology to come over to Australia and keep on being an insider outsider. And so it's so I think that's where I'd say my story begins. There's so many parts to it. What do you want to know? Tell me more.
Because there's because obviously we're diaspora people, so we understand that there's a difference between where your story begins and where your people
Yeah.
And so you've talked about the outsider in and having that identity belonging among across lots of different countries and continents.
Yes.
So we always think it's a good place to start because we're diaspora people.
Yeah.
So yeah. And so that leads into my next question, which is about where are your people from?
This is okay, so my parents are Colombian, and our lineage or my ancestry is connected to sort of white colonial Spanish and the new race that was formed in Colombia during colonization, which are called the Creoles or the Criollos. And so, and I'm sure there, even within that there are, influences from, many indigenous groups and African Caribbean groups that were in the area. And so, but I've always identified as a white Latina. Well, actually, that's a new word I'm using. I've always identified as a child of the world, and, not kind of just sticking to one place. And so I think even preparing for this podcast, having more conversations about where we're from, it has been really interesting. It's tapped into a lot more curiosity. And so nobody really knows. No one has done the story. No one's gone to, like, it. Whatever's the assumed knowledge is simply the assumed knowledge. And so, we've always been from Colombia. But I'm not entirely from Colombia. So I grew up in the US. I grew up in New Jersey and in Florida. I also grew up in Brazil. And I didn't get to Colombia until I was about 12. And so, this kind of mix, we used to tease that I was a bit of a bits of this and a bits of that, because again, those cultures are, and even my accent, it's quite, I was quite shaped by that. And then I came to Australia when I was 27. And again, it's, where do I belong? Because Colombians wouldn't necessarily identify me or recognize me as a Colombian. I don't have any ties to the United States other than, that's where family reside, but I don't have like a passport or nationality, but I have a lot of cultural markers, and they won't recognize me as American. And Australians don't recognize me as Australian, even though I'm, a naturalized citizen now.
Right.
And so it's pretty cool. It's pretty weird.
It's like the complex layers, isn't it, of like us as human beings and historical things. I'm really curious to know, given all the complex layers that you've just spoken about, and some bits that I would really love to come back to. One of the things I was really curious about was, given all that you said, like, what's the relevance and what's the place that Ancestry plays for you, given the multiple countries, continents, that's my question, really. I'm really curious.
So I think in everybody's lifetime, there's, in Spanish, they say that your country pulls you, your land will pull you. And it's really, I think, challenging when you don't have a single country of origin.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think going into ancestry work helps you, at least helped me, come to terms that I belong to all of these countries and I belong to all of these relationships. And that is good, and that is part of me. And, I don't need, I say this now after a lot of personal work, I don't need now the recognition of others to be able to claim a country or a language or my experience as my own. And I also, and this is, I think, is the thing that was very important, was I also don't have to be the entirety representation of it for others.
Yeah.
And so I can say I'm Colombian, and other Colombians can say, but you didn't really grow up there, or you don't sound Colombian, or you don't, my favorite one is you don't look Colombian, as if there's one way of looking. But I still live there, and it is informative. And, I connect with many of my personal stories are from there. My family is from there. So that means, I guess, I'm there too.
Yeah.
Wow.
Definitely.
It's a really different point of view, because there's so many layers to just this part of the story that you've just like spoken to us about. And it's not what you think. you know, and yeah, it's not what you think, because, you know, you've talked about, you know, your ancestry in terms of, you know, settlers that maybe came from Spain, being born in Venezuela. Your parents actually are Colombian, America, Brazil, Australia. Wow. It's almost like it's like a post, I don't know, vision of, you know, us as human beings. It's like a
Yeah.
post, you know, it's not about country anymore. It's
Yeah,
not
well,
necessarily.
I can't remember who speaks about this. I'll find the reference, but borders are fluid.
Mm.
And so, you know, and countries change all the time, and their borders change. But the woman that I'm referenced to speaks of localities. Where is your locality from? You know, where are the relationships that you're grounding yourself in, and what does that look like for you? And we'll find that when we share our localities, our story, that there is much more in common than there is in difference. There's much more that unites us rather than separates us. And I think for me, you know, navigating my own story of trying to belong and at the same time remain and proudly different, you know, trying to navigate that has been it continues to be and will continue to be, I think, the interesting parts of the story that I live.
Yeah. It's almost like a reunification, isn't it?
Mm.
It's a reunification of your history. It's a reunification of location, and what you've ingested in those places. So you talked about, you know, the touch point of the USA, so that, you know, if a Colombian meets you, they're like, yeah, but you've got a very different, you know,
Thick American accent. You can say it. Don't worry. I've heard myself on recordings. I sound like it's a bit of a muddled international English language now, but I hope.
No, yeah, your accent is beautiful. We all love it.
It's unplaceable.
It's the best way. Confuse everyone.
Yes.
Awesome.
Okay.
Do you have another question? Go for it.
Yeah. And I wanted to ask, why psychology? And in the vein of, you know, ancestry, do you know of any prolific helpers in your ancestral lines?
So as I've explored the stories of, you know, the ones that I have access to, you know, I know that there were a lot of lawyers in my mother's line.
Okay.
And on my father's line, I think there was a lot of, I actually don't know, to be honest. I know that my grandmother was a seamstress and she had her own shop. But what they did for a living was a small part of who they were. And one of the things that I keep hearing in the stories is the generosity of spirit. You know, people helping each other out in difficult times, taking in cousins and the kids and aunties. And, you know, there's always this, I always get this sense of being a really close-knitted family, even though because of all my travels, I wasn't as physically close with them. Yeah. But the stories I hear and the experiences that I get told is that there was always this kind of inclusivity. Let's bring everybody in. Let's bring to the hearth. And for me, again, kind of that integration, for me, that's what psychology does. It's, you know, I think it's helping people find and find their stories and find themselves within their stories and embody themselves. My mom was studying psychology when I was quite young, and she would come and tell me about it. And so at the age of 10 or something, I declared I was going to be a psychologist.
Wow.
And I said that I would work in a hospital and have a private practice. And one can say I am determined. Others would say I'm stubborn. And here I am. I no longer work in a hospital, but I did that up until recently just because I made some changes in my career path. But, I still work in private practice. And, here I am at my 41-year-old self, and I did what 10-year-old self wanted me to do.
Yeah,
that's amazing. That is truly amazing. I really enjoy sort of listening to your story and the way you talk about a lot of things. Because when I look at your natal chart, as I do with all the other guests that have come on the show, it's like, makes sense. It all just sort of, yeah, exactly. Because one of the things you talk about, with your ancestry is how you sort of, lived across borders, right? Like you lived here, you lived there, you lived there. You've got a Sagittarius ascendant. And so it's like, you love travel. Like that's yes, I do. Yeah, exactly. That's part of who you are. And then in looking at sort of, because one of the other things we like to focus on is our gifts, right? And like where our gifts come from and how we've come to find them. And in looking at your natal chart, one of the first things I recognized was like, oh, your 10th house. 10th house is our career. It's our legacy. It's how we, give out essentially to the world. And yours is in Virgo, and it's packed with like beautiful planets that are like, yes, she's going to be amazing. She's going to do amazing things. And one of the things that I've noticed is, so it's in Virgo. And from my school of astrology, the way we look at Virgo, the way we interpret that is Virgo is ruled by Chiron, which is the wounded healer. So with that in mind, it's like we view Virgos as the healers of the zodiac. You guys are you're analytical, you're detailed, you're very, nuanced in those areas, but you're also the healers of the zodiac. And it just fascinated me, to see that in your chart. It's like, oh my God, that makes so much sense. And so, I mean, I think you've already really answered the first question I would have had, which was like, when did you realize that was your gift superpower was, psychology and working in the space that you're working in?
All right, I guess I get to change. This is what I love about story, because I get to change the language now. So I will no longer use that I was determined or stubborn to become a psychologist, but I was destined. So this works for me.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I guess I exhibited this skill very early on, as a traveler, as someone who has, who's interested in other people. There's a story my parents tell about me being in an airport. And, I would be 7 or 8. And I'd say to my mom, can I go play with that person over there? And my mom would say, yeah, go ahead. But ask first, yeah. And so I'd go over and I'd say, hi, would you like to play, while we wait for the plane? And if I didn't get an answer, remember, because I traveled, I spoke 4 languages at this stage of my life. Wow. I only speak 2 now. They're there somewhere. And so when they wouldn't respond usually I spoke first English. I would switch to Spanish. And if they didn't understand, if I didn't get a response in Spanish, I'd switch to Portuguese. And if they didn't, I'd switch to French. Wow. And if I still didn't get a response, I'd be like,
me, play.
You, come on, let's play. Come, let's go. And so, one of the running jokes is that, or not jokes, but one of the stories that is told about me is that I simply found something I was good at doing naturally and found a way of making money out of it, and through it. And so I think that's when, I've always implicitly known without knowing, like, that idea of, wisdom, but without, consciousness about it. And so it's just, it never occurred to me to do anything else. This is what I wanted to do. And the more I did it, the more I wanted to keep on doing it. And it's still true today.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And again, going back to your chart and looking at that, because the way you sort of explained that to me is like, oh, you were very confident and very sort of almost extroverted, as a kid, and likely still are. And looking at your chart, most of the activity is happening, at the top of your chart. Which, when we look at that, it's like typically people with lots of activity in the upper houses, they are extroverted. They're extroverted people. They're more outgoing. They're more social. They're more, in tune with that sort of vibrancy of putting out, as opposed to people with more activity in the lower half of the chart, or in the lower houses of the chart. They're more internal. They're more, introverted, and they kind of stick to themselves and more of a private sort of life. But moving
I've heard of that word, private life. I'm sure people, I'm sure I have one. I've probably announced it 10,000 times already.
No, all good. Yeah, I just mean that in terms of you're just very bubbly, very outgoing, very, yeah. And you kind of, when you think about it in terms of your career, you kind of have to be, right? Like, you have to be able to be outward, but also then have that balance of pulling people a bit inward to uncover a lot of what's happening with them. And so I guess, did you find any sort of surprises about becoming a psychologist? Was there anything, I know you feel very much, and your natal chart very much indicates that this was always going to happen for you, but was there anything along the way on that journey that took you by? She's like, you want to talk about that?
Add another hour to this, lady. Strap in. Tested so many times. Tested so many times. I remember my very first test was, so I started studying psychology at the very tender age of 18.
Okay.
And first semester in, I'm sitting in my bed and I am crying. Oh. And I say to my dad, I don't think I have what it takes. And bless my father, he's like, you're in first semester. Like, what? Of course we don't know if you have what it takes.
Right.
You've only just started. Like,
you've only just begun.
Yeah. Keep going. And that was a really helpful message of just keep going. Like University Stories here, I didn't get into my preferred university, and so I had to make adjustments, and that kind of starts to, it knocks your wind out a little bit. And then on, finding a job after graduating was really tough. Colombia doesn't have subsidized medicine like Australia does. And so mental health work is done either on a volunteer basis or reserved for the elite, for those who can afford it. And then the few roles that are within sort of the hospital systems or school systems, they're very coveted. And so once you land one of those jobs, there's not a lot of high rotation. And that knocked my wind. So I had to actually work as an English teacher, and worked in schools as a teacher for a while, because I couldn't get a job as a psychologist. And so again, you start going, well, what do I do? And my parents and I, a very great relationship. So my family's quite close, and so all these are all family conversations. We decided that it was time for me to just get more degrees, and I like collecting degrees. I love being a student, and I decided to come to Australia. Yeah. Yep. And coming to Australia, and even though psychology seems to be like universal, universities aren't actually universal. And so learning a new system in a new language, many times I felt maybe I should just do something else. And
wow.
But my destiny guided me through, and and overcame many challenges I hadn't realized were even challenges. Psychology here in Australia is predominantly, upper middle class, white.
Yeah.
And again, I have many privileges that I used and supported me. But it isn't until now that I reflect upon it that I go, wow, okay, that was actually harder than I thought. I didn't have a community already established around me to support me through my studies. Thank goodness I had, a lot of financial privilege, so I wasn't experiencing any financial hardships during the time. But yeah, just so many things about being a migrant, about doing things in a different language, and about like being far from home. There's every step of the way there would have been a challenge.
Yeah.
It's nothing that deterred.
That's what I love to see, because like also within your chart, you've got Jupiter in your 10th house. And Jupiter, we know, is a planet that brings good luck, and it's our planet of fortune and stuff like that. And with that in your 10th house, that's around your career, that's around your legacy. So it makes perfect sense. But at the same time, that Jupiter is opposing your Uranus, which is in your first house. And we know that, Uranus is breakdown, breakthrough energy. And we know that squares are friction, right? And so they're going to, like, throughout your career, throughout your life, that's something that you're going to have to balance. You're going to have to balance sort of those bumps along the way, in your journey. But it sounds as if you've already kind of, went through them and overcome them. So that's great to see. The other aspect of that, I think, would be that you're intended to sort of, what's the word I'm looking for? Transform the status quo with how things operate within your career, within your legacy, that sort of thing. So get ready, girl. Buckle in.
Yeah. I'm already buckled in. World, are you ready for me?
There we go. I like that.
Shake some things up.
Hold on
to your hats.
Absolutely. That is what you're called to do. Yeah.
And it's really funny because this last kind of career move that employment move that I've done was because I had a lot of fire in me to work with people in the eating disorder field, people in larger bodies who were suffering, quite oppressive systems. And I found a place that does the work, and I called them up and I said, I want to work with you.
Oh, nice.
And my boss was like, what do you want to do? And I was like, this is what I want to do. And they're like, we don't have that job. And I was like, okay, but when you do, give me a call.
Yeah.
And she was like, I like you. Let's meet.
Awesome.
And we had 3 months of a conversation in where we shared our ideas and our visions and our hopes and, balancing all the things out. And then she's like, I've got the job for you. You want it?
Yeah.
And said, let's do this. And I've been there for 2.5 years now. And I don't have any plans of leaving just yet.
Awesome. Look at you paving the way. Paving your own way. I love it. Cool.
Great story too. Well, telling it.
And sort of changing gears a little bit. So it takes a lot, like we know within the healing modality, like it takes a lot, right? It takes a lot to do that. It takes a lot to sort of, because you're giving of yourself so much, and then you're also taking on so much from other people, like, feelings. And I think for most people that are in sort of that healing modality tend to be, whether they know it or not, tend to be empaths. Like they tend to be people that can really sort of dig in. And that's why they're amazing at what they do. That's why you're amazing at what you do, because you got a lot of earth in your chart, which is like very grounding. But in terms of how you look after yourself, right? Like what makes you, what propels you? What like really, what's that passion in you that helps you to continue to show up, to be, you know, a conduit of change and transformation for other people?
So I hear two questions out. What keeps me going?
Yeah.
But also, how do I take care of myself?
Yeah.
Like anybody with any trade or craft, you are only as good as your tools. And if you don't take care of your tools, it doesn't matter how much passion you have. It's not going to work.
Right.
And, you know, they don't teach in-depth self-care, or at least not when I went through school, around how to do the work. You know, we don't, in psychology, we try to move away from the energies and astrology and astronomy and we you know, very kind of
Scientific.
Yes.
Pseudoscience, because again, how much can we know? But trying to use scientific method for it. And so they talk about self-care in ways that look like activities, but self-care for me is about mindset. So it's about actually using what I'm helping other people to do. And you have to do it for yourself. You need to, quote unquote, walk the walk.
Yeah.
So, you know, I've been in therapy in and out for a number of years. I float through therapy. So I've had a therapist. I've also used lots of other modalities. So, you know, energy healers, natal charts, astrology, and kind of finding a lot of those also kind of mediums to help support myself. So that's how I keep myself sharp, by doing the internal work, by being curious. The thing that changed powerfully for me was meditation. So I'm trained in Goenka's Vipassana meditation. I've been training for maybe the last 5 years or so.
What is that?
So Vipassana meditation is meditation of pure awareness or plain awareness.
Okay.
And it's rooted in Buddhist philosophy and traditions. It's a secular, the one that's not connected to religion, which is that one called? Secular, non-secular? Secular practice. And it's about becoming, I think my favorite quote I've ever read was, I am going to pay attention to my breath so that I can learn more about my mind. And
I like that.
Through sitting in practice, and again, like sometimes I'm like daily practice, and other times it's like, oh, haven't practiced for 6 months. You know, sometimes so it's very fluid, but it allowed me through the meditative practice to come into myself. And to be with all of me. So not just the nice things about me, which, you know, as you can tell, is abundant, but also the things that, you know, maybe I didn't think I knew about myself, or things that I wish weren't there because they're not as socially desirable. And yet they are part of me, and they're an important part of me. So that process of self-acceptance is the thing that keeps me going. Other parts of my self-care include surrounding me by people who bring me joy, you know, and, you know, to be encompassed in community. I am a family-oriented, community-minded, and I live 16,000 kilometers away from my family of origin. But that's not going to stop me from being connected to them. So, you know, and it's not going to stop me from forming community here and my connections here. Actually, this afternoon I'm off to a barbecue. And so those things that kind of find that balance of being in meditation, being with myself, but also being with others, is that really nice kind of space of self-care.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I kind of wanted, I really liked when you spoke about sort of the different, parts of yourself, especially when you're in meditation and you're seeing sides of yourself that maybe aren't socially, accepted, or, aren't something that you necessarily want to be or to feel, or, those things like that. And I think it's an important thing to bring up for a lot of people, because we tend to want to shut those aspects of ourselves down and push them away. And I think what people are starting to realize is no, you need to integrate. Like, you need to accept. It needs to be self-acceptance. It needs to be integrated into who you are, because it's part of who you are. So I thought that was a beautiful take, a little golden nugget in there. I just wanted to bring that out a little bit more. So we talked about sort of your 100%. Inner work. Yeah, we talked about your inner work and like sort of, what you do to help take care of yourself. And a lot of that looks like it's, a lot of different things, but meditation plays a pretty significant role for you as well. And so what does like rest and play and those sorts of aspects of yourself look like? What does that look like for you? So we know about sort of that inner work and how you maintain, but what does playful Anna look like?
Play? Oh.
It's like, what?
Well, this is not G-rated, right?
Not suitable for children.
I love to play. I'm really, really playful. And so play can come up in all sorts of ways for me. So I love playing and being in my body. So yoga for me is a form of play.
I love that.
Especially when I get to try things out where they seem at first quite impossible. And, it turns out that I can balance on one foot and look like an airplane. Oh, no.
Yeah.
And just being, I think that's a really fun part. I love riding my bike. I tra-la-la bike. So I have a little bike and it has baskets and I can wear my skirts and listen to music and,
that's so Instagram worthy.
Yeah, no, it is. Play also looks like so I play a lot of make-believe games.
Okay.
So I like pretending I'm in a hotel here in my house, and I'll pretend I'm at a day spa, or I'll pretend I'm, we're at, we've done we pretend to go to museums when really we were just watching a documentary, or, so just being really fun and just being a little bit creative.
Yeah.
Look, there's so many ways I play. Again, for me, play is tapping into joy. And I like to tap into joy with almost every breath I can have, even during times of difficulty, even during sadness, even during anger, even, during all of these experiences, the backdrop of that I've been cultivating is joy. And so play is something that comes naturally with that. For example, yesterday I played so much. I had so much fun. I went shopping and I had a walk and I had a coffee and, and all of those things are play. How do I rest? Again, as I said before, I have many privileges, and sleep privilege is one that I have, and have had for many years. So when I'm tired, I go to bed, I put my head on the pillow and I sleep. and then couple of hours later, an average between 8 to 10, depending on how tired my body is, I open my eyes and my eyes open and I'm awake. And I am rested. So sleep is one form of rest, but I love reading books. I love crafting. I'm not a very good crafter, but I love to craft. My favorite thing to do is mooching, which is sort of basically a couch potato kind of. Okay. Yeah, just I like to mooch around.
Yeah, mooch around the house. Yeah, I got
mooch around the house. And just watching TV. Don't make me choose anything. Just turn the TV on and I'm happy to stare at it for a while. I don't really, it doesn't.
Decisions, no.
No. Whatever's on, I don't care. So there's lots of ways that I rest. I try to make sure to protect those spaces.
Mm.
I think you said something earlier about like being very high energy and, you know, and that is a big part of my personality and my energy levels. As long as I make sure to balance that out with
Absolutely.
rest and play and quiet time. And as I've gotten older, I'm much better of saying, I'm going to take a nap now, or I'm just going to do a little quiet activity now.
Yeah.
You know, just kind of, and that's also really restful for me.
That's great. That's really beautiful. I think in terms of, I really like the ideas that you came up with, or the things that you do for yourself in terms of play, because sometimes we don't really know what that looks like as adults. We don't know what play is. We don't know how to do it. It feels awkward. It feels weird. You know what I mean? Like it's just this massive thing that's like, oh, what do I do? And I think in the people that we've spoken to and that I've spoken to in my own life, I find that people with a lot of fire in their charts, which of course is you, my love.
I was going to ask, because I feel like I have a lot of fire in my chart.
You do. You're probably your highest sort of element is earth by far, and you're kind of neck and neck with fire. Oh, actually water is second for you, and then fire, and then air is like pretty much non-existent. Yeah.
There's a bit of it there.
There's a tiny drop of air in there. But what I was going to say was, yeah, I think we can take a lot of notes from fire signs, people with a lot of fire in their charts in terms of what play looks like, because those signs tend to be very playful. They're all about creativity and sort of exuberance and living their life sort of to the fullest. So I really appreciate what you just shared there, because I think that can help a lot of people like get some ideas and inspiration as to what play actually looks like.
Yeah, it's again, play is a mindset. Like anything can be a game,
right?
You know, as Mary Poppins says.
I tried to show my kids that movie recently, and they were just like, "What is this?"
What?
A bit young.
I love Mary Poppins. So I think, you know, all of this is mindset. I get to choose how I make sense of the world. And it's not to erase the struggles and the challenges we've had, by choosing to view the world as a playground or as an opportunity to play, doesn't dismiss or remove, you know, our traumatic experience of growth, of separation, of challenges. It has an opportunity to become part of it. And I think that mindset of choice, that mindset of tapping into what your needs are, makes how you engage with play, how you engage with rest, and how you engage with work, a really important part of, you know, keeping you going.
And just in relation to what you've just said about mindset, do you think that there is an element where you might need to put something down to take something up? Does that make sense?
Yeah,
because
totally.
you can cultivate the mindset, but then you may have to take down, you may have to dismantle the idea that other people are watching, it's not what other people want me to do, or this is a massive departure from how I've previously may have seen myself. So there is that kind of not changing armor, but maybe taking armor off and then playing in the sandpit. You know?
In therapy, we talk a lot about choice and consequences. And so I can make a number of choices, and each of those choices will have consequences. And I need to decide what choices are available to me at a certain time, and what those consequences are. If I, so some of the feedback that I got when I first started studying psychology here was that I was a bit too loud, and quite
like
bubbly, full on. Bubbly, full on. And that I needed to be a lot more, you know, to be essentially a good psychologist, you need to be a little bit more tame.
Wow.
And I tried. I looked. I did my best.
I be all the things that they wanted me to be, but I just couldn't.
I did. And you know what? And I did it well because it was my destiny to be a psychologist. And so I could put things, and again, I'm very adaptable. So I could put the hair in a box and I could you know, well, actually, no, I've never been able to speak. This is the quietest I'll ever be able to speak. And it felt okay, but it didn't feel authentic.
Right.
And then I made a choice, and the choice was to be more authentic. And that some of those consequences was some of the employments that I have weren't suited to me.
Yeah.
And I wasn't suited to them. And that's okay. And so I still am loud, and that is one of the, most consistent feedbacks I get. And that's why my consulting room is sort of in the back, and, it's almost soundproof to make sure that, the sound stays in.
Adapting, that's what I like.
Yeah. And so, and you do have to, and people, and this is outside of the consulting room, but when you change the way you relate with yourself and you relate with the world, there are some people who are going to like that and some people who aren't. And you need to let go of the things that no longer serve you, and you might let go of them for a little bit, or you might let go of them for a lifetime. Because if you keep on holding on to things, you can't receive other stuff that's coming your way.
Exactly.
And so you gotta let go. There's nothing wrong with letting go. And just to touch on this point real quick, the idea of who we think we are is just that. It's just an idea. It's an opinion, right? It doesn't actually exist. So we're man-made. So we get to modify where we feel appropriate and what feels, try things out. So, the I is a loose concept in terms of,
I love that.
Yeah. I do too. That's amazing, because as you were talking, I was just thinking about, someone with this massive armor on that's trying to be in the sandpit. It kind of doesn't work, does it? It's kind of injurious, really.
Well, I mean, unless they're there as a statue, right? If that's how they want to play.
I know. I mean, they're trying to play in the sandpit. They're trying to get in there, and
it's gonna be hard.
And injurious. I think you can injure yourself.
Well, yeah, because then sand gets in and that starts itching, man, and it's ouchies, ouchies, yeah. You gotta take some of that stuff off.
And the bits where the armor meet definitely is going to pinch you.
And it's going to
pinch. It's going to bend down. It's going to, uncomfortable.
Loving this analogy, ladies. Loving it.
Yeah. And that's really interesting, the idea of armor. I mean, we do need to put on our, especially in healing professions, I think it's important that we know very well what is mine and what's not mine.
Yes.
And and that sometimes is called armor or a shield or a bubble or a, protective protection. And we do this in everyday life as well. We have parts of ourselves that we will reveal and parts of ourselves that we don't. And it's not that we're being malicious or lying. It's just that that's not appropriate to show that side of myself at the moment.
Party Ange doesn't need to come to work.
No. And, work Ange doesn't need to come to party.
Right. Exactly.
If we don't know how to use the armor adaptively for purposes that serve our plan, our well-being, our intentions, that's when having armor becomes dangerous. So if putting on the armor is something that's important because it will help contain, protect, and serve your purpose so that you can do the thing that you need to do, then that's fine. It's when you no longer are able to take off, it's no longer a choice. That's when armor becomes problematic. That's when any of our behaviors become problematic, when they're no longer a choice.
Mm. Mm.
Wow.
That's really amazing.
That's good.
That's a lot of
That's good.
food for thought.
Yeah,
I feel like, yeah.
Before you drop
Taking in the
that
show
mic.
there.
And go back.
But you know what? It's interesting. It's just really fascinating. You know, coming on this podcast today and really talking about, you know, your journey, you know, through the ancestry, through all the things that you have ingested, observed, and the cake that you make with it. You know, so we've gone through the ancestry and you've come to an understanding about your place in the world, and then you go on to like your career, you know, and about how that relates to who you are, the authentic you, and the bits that give you joy. And then we come to the bits around, you know, well, how do I glow? How do I rest? How do I protect myself? And you use all of those things to be able to make sense, you know, and those are the added ingredients to the cake. And then we get to, you know, all the stuff that you've just spoken about, you know, how you make sense of when we need the armor, when we need the boundaries, the place of play and the ability, you know, and how it's really important for us to see that we maybe can be more adaptable, and that the key thing is about what is it that we need. You know, we maybe don't need to have our hair in a bun and, you know, the twin set and pearls and like be this really, you know, mousy kind of person when actually you're a roaring lion on the inside, you know.
And the out, look at this hair.
Love it.
You know, and you talk about that actually there's space for all of us. There's space for all of us in terms of our bodies, in terms of our needs. And with this whole journey that you've taken us, you know, this life story journey that you've taken us on, I suppose I'm now thinking about, for you, Anna, what does it feel like to be you, given all the things that you've spoken about on this podcast? What does it feel like to be you?
Amazing. It feels amazing. It's a roller coaster. It's not always even. It's not always, you know, plain or smooth sailing. There are, you know, many challenges that I internally experience, but also externally encounter. But it's a good life I live, and you know, there's so much joy in my life, and so yeah, I wouldn't change. I'd change maybe, you know, there's a few parts of the stories that I wish I could, like, you know, tinker a little bit, but you know what, it's not that bad.
Yeah. Amazing. And you know, we've talked about a little bit about the body of your work and what are some of the values and your knowledge base that sits behind that. But if you could control the narrative, and you do control the narrative, what does your legacy look like?
I think this is a question that when we first, it has given me it has been hardest to answer.
Really?
Really? There is in some way a part of me that wants to say, or that feels that that's not up to me to determine what people take from my story. That's up to the individual, whatever makes sense to them, or as a community, whatever, you know, the universe will decide what it wants to hold on to. And then there's another part of me that goes, yeah, that's bullshit, Anna. You work your ass off for this.
Yep.
And so the other part of me, I want people to, my best man at my wedding made a great comment in his speech to me. which was, so yes, it was a man who was my best man. My maid of honor was my man of honor. And in his speech, he says that, everyone gets to feel heard and seen in their relationships with me. And that for me is enough of a legacy.
Yeah.
That's beautiful.
No statue.
I know, right? Like,
no statue. Right,
no statue. I mean, maybe a tattoo, just maybe like a little one, like maybe or behind the ear or something, just a little one.
Oh, that's beautiful. That's really beautiful. Oh, thank you so much for today. Yes. It has been an absolutely beautiful conversation. I've thoroughly enjoyed myself. Angela?
Absolutely. Amazing.
Thank you so much.
To get to hear your story and the connections that you make, and the help that you give, your assistance that you give to people. We thank you so much.
But before we go, Anna, I would like to ask, is there any sort of parting words that you would like to leave for the audience?
Yes. Be brave. Be courageous. Don't shy away from this inner work, even if it's hard, especially if it's hard. There are so many things that keep us from being this version of ourselves. So do what it takes. Be brave. Go with courage into yourself and into your world.
Beautiful. Thank you so much.